What's up, everybody? Michael Murray here to talk about TPE 9, subject-specific pedagogical skills, and today we're going to focus on history teaching in our multiple subject students. And so a quick overview of TPE 9, some things that stood out were an understanding of the physical world to encourage our students' participation and responsibility within our democratic system of government, and teaching students about our past. So we really want to have students also think about improving their ability to make reasoned decisions based on evidence. We want to teach our students how social science concepts and themes provide insights into historical periods and cultures. We want them to understand events and periods from multiple perspectives by using primary sources, simulations, case studies, and cultural artifacts, etc., etc. And we want to teach our students to write a variety of texts in which they make claims and form interpretations based on a variety of primary and secondary documents. So really, TPE 9 is about having our students perform at those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy when learning and interacting with history. So the article I chose was, it's called An Action Research from Implementing the Flipped Classroom Model in Primary School History Teaching and Learning. And so this article starts off by kind of noticing the current trend when teaching history in primary school. And so when we think about, traditionally we've thought of history teaching as focused on memorizing content, right? So students are supposed to memorize a few names, some events, and some dates. And that's how traditionally we've approached history. And so this leads to too much time spent on lectures and low student enthusiasm. So students are kind of just sitting in their desk. They're not interacting much with the material. They're listening to the teacher perform a lecture, and students aren't excited about that. They aren't excited to learn history. So really, history becomes kind of the subject that nobody wants to learn about. And so this article really asks, how can we increase historical thinking skills and engagement with students in more interactive learning? How can we get students excited to learn about history? And how can we improve their historical thinking skills and have them perform at those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, those analyze, hypothesize skills in the historical setting? And so they come up with this flipped classroom model. And so a breakdown of how this works is, step one would be teacher assigns quizzes, discussion boards, and relevant video lectures to the students before coming to class. So students come to class with a basic understanding of what's going to be discussed inside the class. And so then step two would be the teacher then leads class discussions about the material with questions to assess the students, has a Q&A sessions to kind of assess their understanding of the material. And then the students have time to engage in collaborative activities, debates, and guided practice. So a visual breakdown of what this looked like is we had two groups. The control group did more of a traditional nothing before the class, and then lectures with the Q&A, and then they had, if they had time, they did activities with that practiced their historical thinking skills. Whereas the experimental group, they did all of the quizzes, discussion boards. They did their videos before coming to class, so that when they came to class, they had a lot more time to have that Q&A session with the teacher. They can get teacher feedback, and then they had time to do those activities where they can collaborate and really interact with the material instead of sitting in class and receiving a lecture from the teacher. And so after one term, both groups took two tests. One was your traditional standardized test, multiple choice, very rigid. And they also took a test that was assessing historical thinking skills and understanding. So much more open-ended questions on historical sources. And then they had questions that were linked to specific learning goals. And those were to be assessed by a teacher-created rubric. So really assessing how well they understood the material and how well they could perform at those deeper levels of understanding. And so here are the results. The students in the flipped classroom model showed similar memorization skills as the control, but we have to remember that they spent significantly less time on lecture. They spent their time on the guided practice, those collaboration activities, and with those activities, memorization still occurred even though they weren't sitting in a lecture. And it has no surprise that the students who practiced those activities they did significantly better in performing those historical thinking skills. So they were better at analyzing, hypothesizing, considering other historical perspectives. They were better at deeper learning assessment. And so if we break this down, it really should make sense, right? So those students who practiced those deeper levels of Bloom's taxonomy did better in that kind of assessment, right? So the experimental group spent 0 minutes in the lecture, while the control group spent 220 or 210 minutes in lecture. They spent a lot of time trying to receive information, and so those students in the control group weren't doing as well in the assessments of higher level learning because they didn't practice it. They spent most of their time in the lecture, whereas the students in the experimental group in the flipped classroom model, they practiced those levels of learning in all the activities that they had time for because they weren't sitting in a lecture, right? And so it's still valuable for those students to practice those activities because memorization was not the goal, but it still occurred in those students who were practicing those historical thinking skills in the classroom instead of being in the lecture. And so, yay, we did it! We flipped classroom instruction cures all, right? Our students are performing at deeper levels of learning. They're understanding our historical material. They're engaged. We did it. Let's celebrate as teachers. We are through and through. We found it. Except not so fast, right? So the flipped classroom model definitely has its benefits, but with those benefits may come some challenges that we have to acknowledge. And so some of the challenges with the flipped classroom model are that students need to be trained in this process. They need to learn how to navigate the online modules so that they can successfully access the material, the discussion board, the quizzes, the videos. They need to learn how to manage all of that. And also our parents need to be familiar and on board with this model because oftentimes, especially with our young kiddos, our parents are involved in any kind of homework, and so they're going to need to understand and know how to support their kids in accessing the online material. This also requires significant investment on behalf of the teacher, so you're the one really is going to put together these modules. You're the one who's going to be creating the quizzes, the discussion board questions. You'll be putting together the videos, and so that requires significant time and investment from the teacher. So before we say, hey, flipped classroom model is the best, we have to understand that it does take a lot of work. And also some students are going to come to class unprepared, right? So as much as we put into our online systems, our online modules, some students are going to come to class without interacting with that material, and so they're going to come to class into a Q&A session without any background knowledge. They're not going to be prepared for that classroom setting, and so we have to kind of think, how can we make sure that our students are coming to class prepared so that they can get the most out of those activities, get the most out of those Q&A sessions. And so this brings us to our discussion questions for today. So first, so what? So what does this mean for you and a content grade level that you would like to teach? Now what? What are the practical applications to the information provided for the content grade level that you would like to teach? And what are some activities or strategies that you can use in your classroom to promote a deeper understanding in social science or history for your students? And then, do you think the flipped classroom model can help students understand other subjects? If so, maybe which ones? And then how can you work through a challenge that the flipped classroom model brings? Right? Hope you learned something today, and I'll see you all soon.